Before the first whisper of time, there was only silence. Not the kind of silence that follows sound, but the kind that existed before sound ever dreamed of being born. There was no light, no darkness, no direction, no sky, no sea, only a formless vastness that stretched beyond thought itself, and the ancients called it chaos. Chaos was not evil, nor alive in the way we understand life. It was a deep stillness, a boundless womb where everything slept, waiting. In that endless calm there were no stars, no ground to stand on, only potential, resting like dust before the breath of a god. Then, without reason and without warning, chaos began to stir. A soft tremor rippled through the void, not loud, not violent, but patient and infinite, like the heartbeat of something awakening. And from that trembling came the first being, Gaia, the earth herself. Gaia opened her eyes to nothingness, and in her first thought she imagined form. Her imagination became reality. Beneath her stretched soil and stone, and within her veins flowed molten rivers of life yet unborn. She became the Great Mother, the solid foundation upon which everything else would rest. But Gaia was not alone for long. From the same silent darkness came Tartarus, the deep abyss that lay beneath all things, a realm of shadow and echo, where the foundations of the earth reached down into eternity. It was said that even the gods feared to speak his name aloud, for Tartarus was the boundary between existence and nothing. Then came Eros, the very first light of emotion, not the winged boy with arrows that poets later spoke of, but a golden pulse that shimmered through the void. Eros was the power of connection, the quiet warmth that draws all things together. He was the first desire, the first love, the soft ache that would forever guide the world toward union and creation. From chaos, too, were born Erebus, the shadow that fills the unseen corners, and Nyx, the goddess of night. They were lovers of darkness, gentle and ancient. Together, they gave birth to the veil that separates dream from wakefulness. When Nyx spread her wings across the newborn earth, Gaia felt her first rest, and in her slumber, mountains began to rise like breathing lungs. Rivers traced their paths across her body, and forests took root within her dreams. As time stretched onward, though time itself had not yet been named, Gaia grew lonely. She had no one to share her thoughts with, no one to hold her in the endless expanse, so she willed into being her companion, Uranus, the sky. He descended in a shower of silver light, vast and beautiful, covering Gaia with a mantle of stars. When he embraced her, day and night were born. His laughter became thunder, and her sighs became the wind. Together, Gaia and Uranus filled the void with life. They gave birth to the Titans, beings of immense strength and grace, who walked upon the earth like mountains come alive. Each Titan shone with purpose. Oceanus, who wrapped the earth in flowing water. Tethys, the gentle sea mother. Hyperion, the light of the heavens. Thea, whose radiance would give birth to the moon and sun. Coeus and Phoebe, keepers of wisdom and prophecy. And at last, Cronus and Rhea, the youngest pair, he clever and ambitious, she soft and kind. But Gaia and Uranus bore more than beauty. From their union came also the Cyclopes, giants with a single eye that burned like a furnace of creation. They were craftsmen beyond compare, the first to shape thunder and lightning in their hands. And then came the Hecatoncheires, monsters with 100 arms and 50 heads, so vast that the ground trembled beneath their steps. Uranus looked upon these children and felt fear. Their power was too great, too wild, and in his fear he did what the fearful always do. He tried to hide what he could not control. He forced them back into Gaia's womb, burying them deep within her belly until the earth groaned and cried in pain. Night after night, Gaia wept. The mountains on her back shuddered, her rivers turned bitter, and her cries echoed through every valley of existence. Her once gentle love for Uranus turned into grief, and grief into anger. She could no longer bear his cruelty. In her despair, she began to plot. One evening, when the stars burned quietly in Uranus's sky, Gaia reached into her own heart and shaped a weapon, a sickle, carved from unbreakable stone. Its edge gleamed faintly, like the light of a newborn moon. She gathered her Titan children and spoke softly. "My sons, my daughters, your father has brought pain upon me and upon your brothers hidden within me. Will none of you free your mother from her torment?" The Titans looked upon one another in fear. To rise against Uranus was to rise against the heavens themselves. For a long time, none spoke until Cronus stepped forward. His eyes were cold but resolute. He took the sickle from Gaia's hands and said only, "I will do it." That night, when Uranus came to lay upon Gaia, Cronus hid among the shadows. As the sky descended upon the earth, Cronus lifted the sickle and struck. The heavens split open with a sound that shook eternity. The stars screamed across the blackness, and the sky withdrew in agony. From Uranus's blood that fell upon Gaia's soil came new life. The Furies, winged spirits of vengeance, the giants, whose rage would one day challenge the gods themselves. And from the sea foam that gathered around his severed flesh, a figure began to form, a woman of light and beauty, born from sorrow yet destined to rule over desire. Her name was Aphrodite. When the storm of creation calmed, Cronus stood triumphant. The heavens retreated, the earth exhaled, and peace seemed to return. But Gaia's prophecy lingered. As Uranus's fading voice echoed from the skies, he cursed his son. "Just as you have overthrown your father, so too shall your own child overthrow you." Cronus ignored him. He believed himself untouchable, the king of a new world, the ruler of the Golden Age, a time when no man yet walked the earth, when rivers sang and the stars danced freely across the sky. But Gaia knew better. The wheel of power turns for all who hold it. The same desire that had once driven Uranus to control now slept within Cronus himself, waiting, growing, preparing for the next story. And far above them, Eros still glowed softly, that eternal spark that binds all things together, watching as love, ambition, and fear began to weave the endless tapestry of Greek myth. The world grew quiet after the fall of Uranus. The sky retreated to its throne of distant stars, and the earth, Gaia, exhaled her first sigh of relief in ages. The wounds within her soil began to heal. The cries of her buried children softened to whispers, and the silence that followed was almost sacred. Cronus, her son and liberator, rose to power. He stood upon the mountain peaks and looked out over the newborn world, a world still young, green and untouched by mortal footsteps. The rivers ran like liquid glass, and the forests sang softly with winds that had never known sorrow. This was the beginning of what the poets would one day call the Golden Age. Under Cronus's rule, there was no war, no hunger, no sickness. The Titans, his brothers and sisters, spread across creation, each shaping the world in their own image. Oceanus and Tethys ruled the endless waters, their waves lapping gently against the edges of the earth. They created the rivers and streams that would one day feed the lands of men. Hyperion and Theia, the bright ones, lifted the sun and moon into the sky, painting the heavens with golden and silver light. Coeus and Phoebe watched over the stars, their wisdom guiding the constellations into order, and Rhea, gentle and nurturing, walked beside Cronus as his queen. Together, they brought balance to the world. Seasons turned softly, flowers bloomed without end, the wind carried laughter through the valleys, and Gaia herself seemed to smile once more. Even the deep places of Tartarus were still, but peace is fragile. And in every age of calm, a shadow begins to gather, not from hatred, but from fear. For though Cronus ruled with fairness, and he ruled also with paranoia, he remembered the curse of his father. The words of Uranus haunted him like a ghost. Just as you have overthrown your father, so too shall your own child overthrow you. Each night when Rhea slept beside him, Cronus would lie awake and stare into the dark. He imagined the faces of his future children, faces that might one day rise against him. And slowly, his love began to twist into dread. Still, time moved forward, and time, though unnamed, was Cronus's own domain. For Cronus was more than a ruler, he was time itself, the devourer of all things, and as he ruled, the ages passed like dreams across the face of the world. Then one day, Rhea bore her first child, Hestia, goddess of the hearth. Cronus gazed at the infant in her arms, and for a brief moment, all fear vanished. He saw only beauty and warmth, the fire of home, the spark of peace. But as he looked closer, he saw also the faint reflection of his father's prophecy, and fear returned. Without warning, Cronus reached out and took the child from Rhea's arms. Her cries echoed through the halls of the Titan's palace. And before she could stop him, Cronus opened his mouth and swallowed his daughter whole. The world shuddered, the rivers paused, even the stars dimmed for a heartbeat. Rhea fell to her knees, trembling, unable to comprehend what she had just seen. Cronus wiped his lips and spoke softly. "No child of mine will ever rise against me." Rhea wept through the night. But soon she bore another child, Demeter, and again Cronus swallowed her. Then came Hera, and she too was devoured. Then Hades, then Poseidon. One by one he consumed them all, until his belly became a prison filled with the muffled cries of his own blood. Yet even as he did this terrible thing, the world outside remained in harmony. The rivers still sang, the sun still rose and set. The mortals who would one day come were still only seeds of thought in Gaia's heart. And so, for a while all was still, but Rhea could no longer bear her grief. She wandered across the mountains, her feet leaving trails of sorrow in the grass, until she came upon Gaia, her mother. The earth, wise and ancient, listened in silence as Rhea poured out her pain. "Mother," she whispered, "he has eaten them all. Every child I bring into the world, he takes from me. He fears his destiny so much that he has become its servant. What can I do? How can I stop him?" Gaia, who had once known the same pain herself, placed her hand upon Rhea's shoulder and said, "History repeats, my daughter. For even the gods cannot escape the circle of fate. But if he fears prophecy, let prophecy be his undoing. When next you bear a child, hide it from him." Rhea nodded, her eyes burning with a quiet resolve, and soon she found herself with child once more. When the time of birth came, she journeyed far to the island of Crete, where the mountain Ida rose like a cradle toward the sky. There, in a hidden cave surrounded by trees and mist, she gave birth to her last son, Zeus. The air trembled softly as the newborn cried, and in that cry, the world changed forever. To protect him, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and returned to Cronus. Pretending it was the infant, Cronus, blinded by his fear, snatched the bundle and swallowed it whole, without looking. Satisfied, he returned to his throne, believing himself safe once more. Meanwhile, Rhea carried the real child deep into the cave, where the nymphs of Crete received him with gentle arms. They named him Zeus and swore to keep him hidden from Cronus's gaze. They nursed him on honey and the milk of a sacred goat named Amalthea, and to hide his cries, a band of armored spirits called the Curetes danced and clashed their weapons outside the cave, drowning the infant's wails in music and rhythm. Years passed. Zeus grew strong, not in body alone, but in mind and spirit. He watched the storms that rolled across the mountains and felt something stir inside him. A power not yet named, a destiny not yet claimed. And though he had never seen his father, He dreamed of him often, a shadow on a throne, a giant devouring the stars one by one. Meanwhile, Cronus's rule began to wane. His laughter no longer filled the halls. The skies grew heavy with storm clouds, and the rivers began to murmur strange omens. The balance that once held the world together was beginning to crack. Then one night, as Cronus slept, he dreamed of the same vision that had haunted Uranus before him. A hand rising from darkness, bearing the sickle that once tore the heavens apart. And from that moment, he knew his time was running short. Elsewhere on the slopes of Mount Ida, Zeus stood beneath a sky thick with thunder. The wind carried the scent of rain and fate. He looked up, his eyes reflecting the storm above, and whispered the first prayer ever spoken by a god to the sky itself. Father, if destiny calls for blood, let it be mine to spill. Gaia, listening from deep within the earth, smiled sadly. The circle was closing once more. The child of prophecy had grown, and the age of the Titans would soon come to its end. Far away from the golden palaces of the Titans, beneath the green slopes of Crete, the child hidden by his mother grew strong. Zeus learned to walk upon the mossy stones of the cave, his small hands tracing the walls that pulsed with the heartbeat of the earth. The nymphs whispered ancient lullabies as they bathed him in cool streams, and the goat Amalthea fed him milk rich as honey, each drop said to carry a spark of divine power. When the boy laughed, lightning flickered faintly above the cave's mouth. When he cried, the clouds gathered and rain fell softly over the mountains. Even as an infant, the world seemed to move with him, as if nature itself already recognized its future ruler. The curettes, those armored guardians, danced and struck their shields together whenever the child grew restless. The sound was like thunder rolling across distant hills, a rhythm that lulled him to sleep, a promise that the world would always roar in his favor. As the years passed, Zeus grew tall and graceful, his hair dark as a storm cloud, his eyes bright like the first flash of lightning before the rain. He wandered through the forests and over the high cliffs, learning the language of the wind, the patience of the mountains, and the secrets of the sea far below. Yet even in this peace, destiny waited. He began to hear whispers from the trees, from the earth, and sometimes in the silence between his dreams. They spoke of a father he had never seen, a tyrant who devoured his own blood, and a prophecy that slept in his very bones. Zeus's heart was torn between fear and duty, but Gaia herself appeared to him in a dream one night. The ground beneath him glowed with her presence. An ancient light, older than time. Her voice was soft, echoing like waves beneath the world. Child of Rhea, blood of Cronus. The wheel of fate turns again. Your father's rule has reached its end. You must rise, for if you do not, the earth will weep again, and the heavens will remain chained. When Zeus awoke, thunder rumbled across the horizon. He felt strength fill his veins, not anger, not vengeance, but the calm certainty of purpose. He left the cave and climbed to the mountain's peak, where lightning danced across the dark sky. There, the Titan Metis, goddess of wisdom, found him. She saw the resolve in his eyes and smiled. You are your mother's son, she said, and your father's fear. But before you fight him, you must make him weak, for even the greatest tyrant may be undone from within. She handed Zeus a small vial filled with golden liquid, a potion brewed from the heart of the earth itself, crafted to make Cronus release what he had swallowed long ago. Zeus descended from the mountain and traveled in secret, moving through forests that bowed as he passed, through valleys that echoed his footsteps like drums of war. At last, he reached the palace of the Titans, a vast hall of marble and gold, lit by the eternal glow of Hyperion's light. Cronus sat upon his throne, his face unchanged by time, but his eyes weary from the weight of eternity. Zeus approached disguised as a humble servant and offered his father a cup of wine mixed with the potion. Cronus drank deeply, and for a moment the room grew silent. Then a great pain seized him. He clutched his stomach, his golden crown tumbling to the floor. A roar echoed through the halls as the spell took hold. One by one, the children he had swallowed were freed. First Hestia, her light flickering like a candle reborn. Then Demeter, her touch bringing flowers where her feet touched stone. Then Hera, proud and radiant even in confusion. Then Hades, silent and cold as the underworld he would one day rule. And last, Poseidon, whose roar shook the pillars as the sea itself answered his call. They fell to the ground, gasping, dazed, reborn from darkness. When their eyes met Zeus's, they saw the storm in him, the storm that would set them all free. Cronus, trembling, rose from his throne. His voice thundered across the palace. "You dare betray your father, boy?" But Zeus did not flinch. "The world is no longer yours to devour," he said softly. "You have swallowed your children, but you cannot swallow fate." The sky outside darkened. Thunder rolled like 1,000 drums. And from that moment, war began, a war that would shake creation itself, the Titanomachy. For 10 years, the Titans and the new gods clashed across the heavens. Mountains shattered, oceans boiled. The air itself became a weapon, thick with lightning and fire. Zeus led his siblings in battle from the heights of Mount Olympus, wielding thunderbolts forged by the freed Cyclops, who had once been imprisoned by Cronus himself. In gratitude, they had given Zeus 3 gifts, the thunderbolt, the lightning and the storm. To Poseidon, they gave the trident, a weapon that could stir the seas to fury. To Hades, they gave the helm of invisibility, which cloaked him in shadow and fear. From the depths of the world, the Hecatonchires rose again, those 100-armed giants long buried by Uranus. They hurled boulders as big as mountains into the sky, their roars shaking the heavens. The Titans fought back with fury. Atlas, strong as the world itself, led their armies. Hyperion's light burned through the clouds. Caius and Creus unleashed storms of their own. The world itself trembled under their rage. For a decade, neither side yielded. Lightning and fire clashed with earth and shadow. The seas rose to swallow the land, and the stars flickered like dying embers above the battlefield. Then, on the final day, Zeus called upon every force of nature. He raised his hands, and thunder split the sky open like glass. Bolts of light rained down upon the Titans. The mountains cracked apart. The oceans turned white with foam, and the world echoed with the voice of a new king. Cronus fell to his knees, his golden armor shattered, his sickle broken. Zeus stood before him, his body glowing with the fire of heaven itself. "It is over," said Zeus, his voice calm and heavy as rain. "You ruled through fear. Now the world will be ruled by balance." Cronus looked up, his face hollow. "You think you are different," he whispered, "but every son becomes his father." Zeus did not answer. He raised his hand, and from the depths of the earth, a chasm opened. The defeated Titans were cast into Tartarus, where the Hecatonchires became their eternal wardens. The sound of stone doors closing echoed across eternity. And so ended the age of the Titans. The heavens cleared, the earth cooled, and the air filled once more with the gentle hum of peace. Zeus, standing upon Mount Olympus, looked out over the reborn world, the rivers gleaming in the sunlight, the winds carrying songs of freedom. His siblings gathered around him, and together they swore an oath that they would share the heavens, the sea and the underworld between them, and keep balance among gods and men. To Zeus went the sky, to Poseidon the sea, and to Hades the realm beneath. The 3 brothers clasped hands, and thunder rolled as a sign that the new order had begun. From that day forward, Mount Olympus became the seat of divine rule, a palace among the clouds where immortals would dwell, and where Zeus, the thunderer, would reign for eternity. But even as peace returned, and the whisper of prophecy lingered, for every throne invites challenge, and every victory is the beginning of another test. And far below the earth, in the darkness of Tartarus, Cronus sat upon a cold rock, his eyes reflecting the faint flicker of firelight. He smiled a weary, knowing smile and whispered to the void, "The wheel turns still. My son, one day it will turn for you." The air grew still, and somewhere deep within the roots of the world, Gaia listened and began to dream again. The world was quiet again. The thunder of war had faded, and the smoke that once wrapped the mountains had drifted away into blue. Peace settled across the earth like mist at dawn. The rivers sang again, the forests whispered with life, and the sky, cleansed by the storm, stretched endlessly above all things. The Titans were gone, locked within the endless caverns of Tartarus, their roars distant, muffled, like thunder, trapped beneath the ground. The reign of Zeus and his siblings had begun. High above the clouds, upon Mount Olympus, the new gods built their golden home. Its halls shimmered with light that never dimmed. The air smelled of rain and ambrosia. Laughter echoed through corridors of marble and crystal. Here, time flowed differently, soft, eternal, as if even the wind dared not disturb the stillness of the divine. But below them, the earth lay empty. There were no mortals, no laughter of men, no voices to sing praise or tell stories of the gods. The world was beautiful, but it was silent. Zeus looked upon it and said, "Let the earth bear children who walk upright, who speak, who dream, who may look upon the stars and wonder who made them." So he called upon Prometheus, the Titan of foresight, one of the few who had not fought against him during the Great War. Prometheus was clever, patient, and kind. He loved the earth, and often wandered its valleys, feeling the warmth of sunlight and the pulse of life beneath his feet. Where others saw only stone and dust, he saw possibility. Zeus spoke, "Prometheus, you have the hands of a craftsman and the mind of a god. Shape for me a new being, a creature that will carry the spark of Olympus, yet live upon the soil of Gaia." Prometheus bowed his head and went to work. He knelt upon the earth and gathered clay from the riverbanks, mixing it with his own tears and the breath of the wind. From that sacred mixture, he began to mold a shape, not beast, not god, but something between the two. He gave it limbs strong enough to climb the mountains, eyes bright enough to see the stars, and a heart capable of both love and sorrow. When he was done, he looked upon his creation, a fragile, unfinished thing, soft and trembling, but full of quiet promise. Prometheus lifted his hand to the sky and whispered a prayer. From the heavens, a small spark of lightning descended, a spark that glowed red as the breath of life entered the clay. The figure gasped and opened its eyes. And thus, mankind was born. Prometheus watched as they learned to walk, to speak, and to feel the warmth of sunlight on their skin. He taught them how to build shelter from the rain, how to weave branches into homes, how to carve stones into tools. He watched them grow, and though they stumbled often, they learned quickly. They sang to the rivers, and they whispered to the stars, and the gods above began to listen. But Zeus grew wary. He saw how the humans looked to Prometheus with love and trust. He saw how the Titan guided them gently, as a father guides his children, and Zeus feared what that love might become. "They are weak," Zeus said one evening, his voice echoing through the halls of Olympus. "They must remain so. If they grow too strong, they will challenge even us. Do not give them fire. Fire, the sacred flame of Olympus, the secret of creation and destruction, and the power of the gods themselves. Without it, mankind was doomed to live in darkness, shivering beneath the cold stars, eating raw roots, fearing the night. Prometheus bowed to Zeus, but his heart was heavy. He returned to earth and watched his children, cold, hungry, their hands trembling as they tried to survive. He watched mothers cradle their dying infants, watched men scrape at the frozen ground, watched the shadows swallow their songs. And then he decided, under the cover of night, Prometheus climbed the great mountain where the gods kept their sacred fire. The air grew hot, and the stars above flickered like watchful eyes. He reached the summit and saw the flame and a pillar of golden light, eternal and pure. For a long moment, he hesitated. To steal fire was to betray the King of Heaven, but to withhold it was to betray mankind. He took a hollow reed, bent low, and with steady hands captured a small ember. The flame hissed and danced within its shelter. Prometheus turned and descended, his heart pounding with fear and hope. When he reached the earth again, he knelt beside the shivering humans and touched the reed to a pile of dry wood. The ember leapt to life. The first fire burned, crackling softly, casting light upon their faces. The people gasped, awed and afraid. Prometheus smiled and said, "This is not mine to keep. It is yours now. Protect it, and it will protect you." From that night onward, the world changed. Smoke rose into the heavens for the first time. The darkness retreated. Men gathered around the fire and told stories. They forged tools, built homes, and learned to cook their food. The spark of Olympus had become the heartbeat of humanity. But on Mount Olympus, Zeus saw the rising smoke. He knew what had been done. His fury was swift. He called upon the winds and the clouds, and his thunder shook the earth. "Prometheus," he roared, "you have defied the will of the gods. For this, you will suffer beyond measure." Prometheus did not run. He stood upon a high cliff facing the storm, his eyes calm. "I gave them warmth," he said. "I gave them hope. Would you have them crawl forever in darkness?" Zeus did not answer. He lifted his hand, and the skies split open. Chains of unbreakable bronze fell from the heavens, wrapping around Prometheus's wrists and ankles. He was carried to the mountains of Caucasus, where the winds howled like beasts. There he was bound to a jagged rock, his body stretched against the cold stone. And Zeus set a great eagle upon him, a creature with wings dark as storm clouds and eyes sharp as lightning. Each day, the eagle would descend and tear at Prometheus's flesh, devouring his liver, which would grow back again each night, so that his torment never ended. Days turned into years, years turned into centuries, and still Prometheus endured. He gazed down upon the earth and watched the humans thrive. He saw their fires burning in every valley, their laughter echoing in the night. Though his body was broken, his spirit remained unshaken, and in time even Zeus's anger began to cool. For though the king of gods had punished the Titan, he could not undo what had been done. Fire had come to the world, humanity had risen, and the age of mortals had begun. Prometheus's name would live forever, a whisper in the wind, a flicker in the flame, a symbol of defiance, sacrifice, and love too great to die. And far above the mortal fires, the gods of Olympus watched, their hearts divided between admiration and fear. For now, the world had changed, and even the immortals could sense that their story had only just begun.
The fires of mankind burned bright against the dark horizon. They flickered in every valley, every forest clearing, every mountain hollow. Tiny lights that pushed back the ancient shadows. The smoke curled up toward the sky like prayers, and even the stars seemed to watch in silence. From his golden throne atop Mount Olympus, Zeus gazed down upon this new world. It was alive, noisy, restless, filled with energy that he could not control. Men hunted, built, and dreamed. They sang songs around their fires, songs of gratitude to Prometheus, the bringer of light. And Zeus's anger, though cooled, was not gone. He could forgive rebellion, but he could not forgive the reminder that mortals carried his divine flame, a piece of heaven, stolen from his hand. So he turned his thoughts toward balance. If Prometheus had given man fire, then Zeus would give man something else, a gift that would humble them, a beauty that would charm and test them, a creation that would bring both joy and sorrow. He summoned the smith of the gods, Hephaestus, whose hammer rang day and night in the halls of Olympus. From the purest clay of heaven, Hephaestus molded a figure unlike any before it. Her form was soft yet strong. Her eyes glimmered like starlight upon still water, and her hair shone like threads of gold. When he was finished, even the gods themselves paused to admire her. Zeus called upon the other Olympians to complete the work. Aphrodite blessed her with beauty and charm, a face that could melt the hardest heart. Athena gave her wisdom and skill, the knowledge to weave, to shape, to speak with grace. Hermes, ever sly, gave her curiosity and cunning, the spark that drives all thought and all trouble. From Apollo, she received the gift of music and light. From Demeter, the sweetness of life itself. When all was done, Zeus smiled. He looked upon her, radiant, divine yet mortal, and he named her Pandora, meaning the one who bears all gifts. But not all gifts are blessings. In her hands, Zeus placed a sealed jar, not a small box, as the poets would later call it, but a great vessel of bronze, carved with strange symbols that shimmered faintly in the sun. He told her never to open it. And as all who have ever lived come to know, the heart most tempted is the heart forbidden. Pandora did not yet know her purpose. Zeus sent her down to earth, to live among the mortals and bring beauty where there had been none. The people saw her and were struck speechless. Never before had they seen such grace, such warmth. Her laughter was like music, her eyes like dawn. Everywhere she walked, the air seemed lighter. But there was one among them who did not rejoice. Epimetheus, the brother of Prometheus, had been warned never to accept any gift from the gods, for Zeus's kindness always carried a hidden thorn. Yet when he saw Pandora, his heart faltered. He welcomed her into his home. And she, with her gentle hands and soft smile, brought joy and light into his days. They lived together in peace for a time, but Pandora was haunted by the jar. It sat in the corner of their home, gleaming faintly in the firelight. At first she ignored it, but curiosity is a seed that grows in silence. Each night as Epimetheus slept, Pandora would glance at it and wonder, what could be inside that the gods themselves would hide? Days passed. The question grew heavier with every breath. Until one morning, as the wind whispered through the trees, she could bear it no longer. She approached the jar. Her fingers trembled. The bronze felt warm beneath her touch, as if something inside was alive. She hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. Then slowly she lifted the lid. At once, the air changed. A hiss, soft and endless, filled the room. Dark shapes poured out of the jar, twisting and writhing. Shadows with faces and whispers that chilled the heart. They rose into the sky like smoke, spreading across the earth, slipping into every home, every heart. Pain, sickness, jealousy, hatred, greed. All the sorrows that would ever haunt mankind escaped that day from Pandora's trembling hands. She cried out, trying to close the lid, but it was too late. The world had changed. The bright laughter of humanity dimmed. The fires burned lower. Where once there had been only joy and peace, now there were tears and death and longing. Pandora fell to her knees, weeping beside the open jar. What have I done? she whispered. But then from deep within the vessel, she heard another sound, a soft hum, faint yet warm. She leaned closer and saw a single light still trapped inside, fluttering like a candle in the wind. It was not dark or cruel. It was gentle, golden, patient. With trembling hands, she reached in and lifted it out. And at once, the room filled with warmth again. It was hope, the last gift Zeus had hidden within the jar. Though he had unleashed suffering upon mankind, he had left them this one mercy, a light that would never die, no matter how deep the night became. Pandora held it close to her heart. Its glow spread through her body, and though she still wept, her tears no longer fell from despair, but from understanding. For even in sorrow there is beauty, even in pain there is purpose, and even when all seems lost, hope remains. From that day forward, the balance of the world was set. Men and women would know love and hate, joy and sorrow, life and death. The world was no longer perfect, but it was real. And in that truth, the gods saw something new, a strength not even immortality could grant. Zeus, watching from above, felt a strange calm. The fire of Prometheus burned on, and humanity, though fragile, endured. They prayed, they built temples, they told stories of gods and monsters, and in those stories, the immortals found reflection. For every god needs worship, and every god needs memory. Without mortals to remember them, even the divine would fade into silence. So the gods watched as the first humans grew, as kingdoms rose and fell, as songs filled the air and dreams filled the night. They watched, and they wondered, and so began the age of men, the long, fragile age of fire and faith, where mortals would strive, fail, rise, and dream, each one carrying within them that last gift from the jar, a spark of hope, small but eternal. The new world glowed beneath a sky of silver and blue. Seasons drifted gently, rivers wandered across the earth like threads of light, and mankind learned to live between the storms and the sunshine. High above it all, upon his shining mountain sat Zeus, king of the heavens, ruler of clouds, thunder, and destiny. He ruled beside his queen, Rhea's daughter, and his sister Hera, the goddess of marriage and sovereignty. Together they reigned over gods and mortals alike, their thrones wreathed in mist and gold. Yet even amid peace, the heart of Zeus was restless. The Thunderer was vast in spirit, part justice, part desire, part unending curiosity for the lives that moved beneath his sky. He loved deeply and wildly, and through his loves the world would change forever. From his passions would be born heroes, kings, and new gods, each carrying a spark of his immortal fire. Europa. One morning, Zeus looked down from Olympus and saw a maiden by the sea. Her name was Europa, daughter of the Phoenician king. She gathered flowers by the shore, her laughter mixing with the sound of waves. The light touched her hair and turned it to molten copper. Zeus watched, entranced. Desire stirred like thunder behind the clouds. To approach her without frightening her, he changed his form into a great white bull, horns curved like crescent moons, eyes gentle and deep. He walked from the surf and knelt before her feet. Europa smiled, unafraid. She placed garlands of flowers around his neck and climbed upon his back. The bull rose and moved toward the water. Before she could cry out, the waves lifted them, carrying them far from shore. The sea grew calm as they traveled, and when they reached the island of Crete, the bull changed shape, and there stood Zeus in all his radiance. The heavens glowed with a soft fire. From their union came 3 sons, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Sarpedon, each destined to rule, to judge, or to fall heroically. When Zeus departed, he left Europa the crown of Crete, and her name would live forever in the western lands. You but love, For Zeus was never simple. For every tenderness, there was jealousy. For every gift, a punishment. Among the mortals there was a priestess of Hera named Io, pure and kind, devoted to the goddess. Zeus saw her one evening as she walked beside a river, her lantern glowing like a small sun. He descended in a veil of mist and spoke softly to her. But Hera, ever watchful, sensed his deceit. The clouds thickened. Jealousy crackled in the air. To hide Io from his queen's wrath, Zeus transformed her into a white cow, beautiful and trembling. When Hera arrived, she smiled sweetly and said, "My lord, what a lovely animal. Surely you would not deny your wife such a gentle gift." Zeus could not refuse. He gave Io to Hera, and Hera set the 100-eyed giant Argus to watch over her. Day and night, Argus kept his unblinking vigil. Io, trapped in her new form, wandered in despair. Zeus pitied her and sent Hermes to set her free. The messenger god played his flute, softly, endlessly, until the giant's eyes grew heavy and closed, one by one. Then Hermes struck, swift as wind, and Argus fell. Hera, furious, placed Argus's eyes upon the tail of her sacred bird, the peacock, so that he would forever watch from the heavens. But Io's suffering was not yet done. Hera sent a gadfly to sting her, and Io ran across the earth in madness, through forests and deserts, over mountains and seas, until she reached the land that would one day be Egypt. There Zeus restored her form and blessed her with a child, Epiphus, ancestor of kings. From her line would come heroes who would shape the myths of ages yet unborn. Semele. Another time, Zeus's heart turned to Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes. She was radiant and kind, and her voice was like the song of a harp. Zeus visited her in secret, but Hera, again jealous, disguised herself as an old woman and whispered doubts into Semele's ear. "If you are truly loved by the king of gods," she said, "ask him to show himself in his divine form. A god who hides may be a liar." Semele, trusting and brave, asked Zeus for this proof, bound by oath. He could not refuse. He revealed himself in his full glory, lightning, fire, the blaze of creation. No mortal could behold such power and live. Semele was consumed in the brilliance, but from her ashes Zeus saved their unborn child, sewing the infant into his thigh until the boy was ready to be born. That child would be Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and rebirth, the immortal born from flame and grief. Leda, once, by a lake quiet as glass. Zeus saw Leda, queen of Sparta, walking among the reeds in the dusk. He descended as a swan, pure and shining, his feathers white as snow. He drifted toward her on the water, and she, mesmerized, reached to touch him. From their meeting came children of beauty and destiny, the twin brothers Castor and Pollux, and the radiant Helen, whose face would one day launch 1,000 ships and bring about the Trojan War. Danae. And then there was Danae, daughter of a king who feared a prophecy. It was said that her son would one day bring his death, so her father locked her in a bronze chamber, hidden from sky and man alike. But destiny finds every lock. Zeus came to her not as a man or beast, but as a shower of golden light that fell through the ceiling, warm and silent. From that golden rain was born Perseus, the hero who would slay monsters and free his mother's fear. Thus, through his loves, the world filled with children of gods, half divine, half mortal, bridges between heaven and earth. They would carry the passions of the immortals and the courage of humankind. Some would bring peace, others war. Some would build kingdoms, others destroy them. But each would leave behind a story, a thread woven into the tapestry of time. And Hera, proud and wounded, watched all this from her throne beside Zeus. Her jealousy burned like a hidden star, and though she never left him, she turned her wrath upon those who bore his seed. Her vengeance would echo through every age, against heroes, against women, against the dreams of mortals touched by godly fire. Yet even Hera, in her fury, could not break the pattern that fate had written. For through Zeus's endless love and straying desire, the line of Olympus grew stronger. From those unions came bloodlines that would shape the world, the founders of cities, the fathers of legends, the ancestors of myth itself. And so, as lightning slept quietly behind the clouds, and as men told stories by their hearths of gods who loved and punished, Zeus sat upon his throne gazing at the horizon. The earth below him stirred with life, his children walking its fields and mountains. Some bore his gifts, others his curse, but all carried his will forward. The night breeze whispered across Olympus, carrying the laughter of nymphs, the music of Apollo's lyre, and the steady heartbeat of the world itself. In that rhythm lay the promise of all that was still to come, heroes yet unborn, wars yet unfought, and 1,000 tales waiting to bloom beneath the gaze of the gods. Beneath the green skin of the living world, deeper than the roots of mountains, past caverns where no sunlight ever falls, there lies a realm older than memory. The poets called it the underworld. The gods named its master Hades. It was not a place of fire and screaming, as fearful hearts would later imagine. It was quiet, vast, solemn. Its air was cool and still, its rivers black as polished glass. The silence there had weight, like the hush that follows the final note of a song. When the Titanomachy ended, and Zeus and his brothers drew lots for dominion, Zeus claimed the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades, without protest, accepted the world below. He did not argue, nor show resentment. He simply bowed his head and descended, taking with him the keys to all that sleeps. The entrance to his kingdom lay hidden, where caves breathe cold mist, and the wind hums through hollow stone. Beyond those gates ran 5 rivers, each with a voice of its own. There was Acheron, the river of sorrow, whose waters murmured softly, carrying the sighs of souls newly arrived. There was Cocytus, the river of lamentation, where cries echoed like distant rain. Phlegethon burned with liquid fire, its glow painting the rocks in red and gold. Lethe, gentle and clear, offered forgetfulness to weary spirits who wished to wash away the pain of their former lives. And at the very heart of all, there ran Styx, the sacred river of oaths, dark and silent, its surface smooth as obsidian. Even the gods feared to swear falsely by its waters, for any who broke such an oath would lose their voice and breath for 9 long years. Upon the far shore of these rivers stood the gatekeeper Cerberus, a monstrous hound with 3 heads and a serpent's tail. His eyes burned like coals, and his growl rolled through the darkness like thunder. Yet he was loyal and gentle to those allowed to enter. A guardian, not a villain. Beyond him lay fields of shadow, stretching endlessly under a sky of dim grey. Here drifted the souls of mortals, their shapes pale, their memories faint. They spoke little, for in death there was no need for haste, no need for hunger or fear. Time moved differently there, soft, circular, without beginning or end. At the center of this vast quiet stood the palace of Hades, built of onyx and silver, its pillars glimmering with faint light drawn from the souls themselves. Hades sat upon a throne carved from jet, crowned not with gold, but with shadow. His eyes were calm, reflecting neither cruelty nor joy, but understanding, for he saw the truth of all things that lived and died. By his side sat Persephone, queen of the dead and daughter of Demeter. Her story began in sunlight. She had once been a maiden of spring, dancing across meadows, her laughter waking flowers from their sleep. Wherever she stepped, the grass grew greener, the air sweeter. Demeter, her mother, cherished her beyond all things. But the world of gods and men is never free from the pull of fate. One day, as Persephone gathered blossoms in a field, the earth beneath her feet began to tremble. A crack split the ground, and from it rose Hades in his chariot of obsidian, drawn by black horses with manes of smoke. He reached for her, not in anger, but in longing that had burned through ages of solitude. The chariot plunged back into the earth, and the meadow fell silent once more. When Demeter discovered her daughter gone, the world grieved with her. She wandered the earth in sorrow, and wherever she walked, the fields withered and died. No seed sprouted, no harvest came. Famine spread across the lands of men. Zeus, seeing the suffering of mortals, sent Hermes to the underworld to speak with Hades. The messenger's voice echoed through the halls of shadow. Great King, the world above fades to dust. Return the maiden, lest all perish and the offerings to your name cease. Hades listened in silence. He loved Persephone, but love in the underworld was bound by truth. And the truth was this: those who eat the food of the dead can never fully return to the light. He brought her to the surface nonetheless, and as she prepared to go, he offered her a single pomegranate, its seeds red as blood. She took it unthinking, and ate 6. When she returned to Demeter's arms, joy filled the sky, but Zeus, knowing the laws of fate, spoke gently. Because she has tasted the fruit of the underworld, she cannot stay above forever. For 6 months of each year she must return to Hades, and for 6 she shall walk among the living. And so the seasons were born. When Persephone rises from the shadows, Demeter rejoices, and spring breathes life into the earth. When she descends again, Demeter mourns, and winter falls across the world. In his realm below, Hades waits patiently, his love neither cruel nor kind, simply eternal. He rules the dead with fairness, assigning each soul its place, the virtuous to the Elysian fields, where meadows glow with eternal sunset, the wicked to Tartarus, where they face the reflections of their own deeds, and the countless ordinary souls to the silent plains of Asphodel, where they wander in dreams that never end. There roam also the judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus and Aeacus, sons of Europa and Zeus, now wise beyond mortal measure. They weigh each life with quiet care, their words shaping destinies even beyond death. Sometimes a hero would come, brave or foolish, to cross these boundaries of shadow. Orpheus once descended, his lyre singing of love so pure that even Cerberus grew still to listen. He sought to bring back his beloved Eurydice. Hades granted his wish, but with a single condition, that he not look back until they both reached the light. And so he walked, heart trembling with hope, until doubt whispered in his ear. He turned, and she was gone. Her final breath dissolved into the dark, and the echo of her name haunted the halls forever. Hades himself watched in silence, for even the Lord of Death cannot change the laws that bind all hearts. Yet his realm was not cruel. It was necessary, a mirror to life above. As flowers bloom only to fade, so too must all things rest. In that rest lay peace, in that peace a strange beauty. And so the underworld endured. Vast and patient, a kingdom without rebellion, a shadow that gives the light its meaning. Every sigh, every song, every heartbeat of mortal life eventually found its way to those silent shores. And there, beneath the eternal stars of the lower sky, Hades listened to them all, the laughter, the tears, the unspoken dreams. He was not a god of punishment, but of return, the keeper of endings that are also beginnings. And though his crown was forged of darkness, Its weight was mercy. After the wars of heaven and earth, when Zeus took the sky and Hades descended below, the third brother looked out upon the blue horizon. The wind touched his face with salt and spray, and the endless voice of the sea called his name. Poseidon, lord of the oceans, ruler of storms, earthquakes and tides, stepped into his realm. The water rose to meet him, folding around his body like silk. Every drop shimmered with light, as if recognizing its master. The deep was his kingdom, vast and unknowable. Its surface glittered beneath the sun, but beneath that calm mirror stretched a world without end, canyons darker than night, mountain chains taller than Olympus itself, and creatures so ancient they carried the memory of chaos in their eyes. Poseidon's palace stood upon the ocean floor, built from coral and pearl, its walls moving gently with the rhythm of the waves. Columns of mother-of-pearl rose toward the dim light above, and the sound of the sea was everywhere, a heartbeat, a hymn, a whisper. There he sat upon a throne of blue stone, holding in his hand the trident, the weapon forged by the Cyclopes, 3 prongs of pure power that could calm the waters or stir them into fury. Around him swam the spirits of the deep, the Nereids, daughters of the old sea god Nereus, their laughter like ripples in still water. The Tritons, his sons and messengers, blew their conch shells to summon tides and storms. Whales sang low songs in the distance, and the shadows of great leviathans glided silently past the palace gates. The sea was a place of beauty and danger, both, as calm as sleep, as wild as rage. Poseidon's heart mirrored it perfectly. He could be generous, granting safe passage and gentle winds to sailors who prayed to him. But when angered, his wrath was terrible. Whole fleets could vanish beneath his storms, and cities that mocked his name would feel the ground tremble as his trident struck the earth. Yet beneath his strength lay something deeper: solitude. While Zeus was adored upon Olympus and Hades ruled among shades, Poseidon wandered between worlds. The sea touched every shore, yet belonged to none. He was everywhere and nowhere, the restless brother, forever listening to the songs of both heaven and earth, but never fully part of either. The contest for Athens. There came a time when the gods chose which cities they would bless. Each god desired a place upon the earth where mortals would honor them forever. Poseidon cast his gaze upon a hill, overlooking the blue Aegean, a land of olive trees and bright stone. He descended upon it, striking the ground with his trident. From the crack in the rock burst a fountain of salt water, its waves foaming and fierce. He turned to the people of that land and said, "Behold my gift, a wellspring of the sea, symbol of power and might. Honor me, and I will make your city feared across the waters." But then Athena, daughter of Zeus, came forward, calm, radiant, wise. She touched the earth beside his fountain, and from the dry soil grew an olive tree, its branches heavy with silver-green leaves. Her voice was soft but steady. "My gift is peace. It will feed your children, and heal your wounds, and bring you wisdom to endure." The people stood between the two gods, uncertain, power or peace, the roar of the sea or the quiet of the earth. In the end, they chose Athena's gift. The city became Athens, and the olive tree its sacred emblem. Poseidon turned away in silence. His pride was wounded, but his heart, deep as the ocean, held no lasting malice. He struck the ground once more, and where his trident touched, the waters swelled to form the sea that would cradle Athens forever. From that day, sailors, leaving its harbors, offered wine to the waves and whispered his name, hoping for calm seas and gentle winds, Amphitrite and the children of the sea. For many ages, Poseidon wandered the oceans alone, until one day he saw Amphitrite, a Nereid dancing among the waves. Her laughter echoed across the waters like bells. He loved her at once, but she fled from his advances, hiding in the farthest depths of the sea. Poseidon sent the dolphin Delphinus to find her. The creature swam for days through coral and darkness, and when he found her, he spoke gently of the god's devotion, of the palace he had built, and the calm that would come to the waters if she returned. Moved by his kindness, Amphitrite agreed. She rose from the deep, and Poseidon welcomed her beside him. He placed a crown of shells upon her head, and together they ruled the oceans. In gratitude, Poseidon placed the image of Delphinus among the stars, where the constellation still swims through the night sky. From their union were born many children, spirits of the waves and tempests, among them Triton, whose voice could calm the winds or stir them into storms. Through them, Poseidon's will moved through every current, his moods carried from shore to shore. Poseidon's wrath and mercy, though mighty, Poseidon was not cruel without reason. He punished arrogance, but rewarded courage. He was the god sailors prayed to before voyages, and the one they cursed when the storm rose too fast. Yet even in his fury, there was balance, for he never struck the innocent, only those who forgot respect for the sea's eternal power. Once, the city of Troy offended him, refusing to pay for the walls he had helped build. In anger, Poseidon sent a monstrous serpent to devour their people until the debt was paid. But when heroes showed bravery before his beasts, he would turn his rage to admiration. He understood strength and honored those who met him without fear. Another time, a king named Minos, descendant of Zeus, prayed for a sign to prove his right to rule Crete. Poseidon sent him a pure white bull from the sea, a symbol of divine favor. But Minos, proud and deceitful, kept the bull for himself and sacrificed another. In wrath, Poseidon cursed the king's house, setting in motion the chain of fates that would one day bring forth the Minotaur, a creature born of pride and punishment. So the god of the sea gave and took in equal measure, his trident shaping both blessing and retribution. Wherever men sailed, they felt his presence, in the gentle rocking of the tide, in the thunder of waves breaking against stone, in the stillness before a storm. To honor him, they built temples by the shore, their columns white as sea foam, their altars crowned with shells and coral. They poured wine into the surf and whispered prayers. Poseidon, master of the depths, steady our course, grant us safe harbor, and let the wind be kind. And when the waves calmed, they knew he had heard, the endless sea. At night, when even Olympus slept, Poseidon would rise from his throne and walk along the ocean floor. His trident glowed faintly, casting light through the drifting currents. Schools of fish swirled around him like living stars. Whales sang their slow, mournful songs, and far above, the moon painted silver paths across the surface. He would look toward the lands of men, their fires flickering along the shores, and feel a quiet contentment. The sea was his, but it also belonged to them, to every sailor who faced its power, to every lover who watched it from the cliffs. For the sea is both home and hunger, both peace and peril, and Poseidon in all his vastness was that truth made divine. He was the heartbeat of the tides, the whisper in the waves, the tremor in the earth when mountains shuddered. Every storm was his breath, every calm his mercy, and so he reigned, not as a tyrant, but as a force of balance. The mortals who feared him also loved him, for they understood what he truly was, the living pulse of the world itself. When dawn came, and the sun rose golden over the horizon, the waves bowed to its light, and deep below, Poseidon smiled. For day or night, peace or storm, the sea would always return, endless, eternal, a mirror to the heart of its god. After the sea had found its king and the underworld its keeper, The heavens turned their gaze toward a gentler kind of creation. Not war, not thunder, not storm, but beauty and balance, the harmony of light and darkness, of life and its quiet twin. From Zeus, the father of gods, and Leto, the soft-voiced Titaness of dusk, were born two children whose presence would forever divide the day and night, Apollo and Artemis, the radiant twins of heaven. The birth on Delos Leto had been pursued across the world by Hera's jealousy. No land dared offer her shelter, for Hera had forbidden all places under the sun to receive her. So Leto wandered endlessly, her feet bleeding, her hands pressed to her womb where life stirred like a secret. She crossed deserts, forests and mountains, each one turning her away in fear of the Queen of Gods. At last, she came upon a small floating island, bare and lonely, drifting upon the sea. It was called Delos, a nameless rock with no roots in the earth, and thus not bound by Hera's decree. Leto knelt upon its sand, and the island trembled with compassion. Its stones softened, its dry springs began to flow, and it offered her refuge. There, beneath the golden light of dawn, and with the gentle waves whispering nearby, Leto gave birth first to Artemis, who entered the world in silence, her eyes calm, her spirit clear as moonlight. She helped her mother bring forth her brother, for even as a newborn, Artemis carried the serenity of the huntress, the quiet strength that guides through pain. Soon after, Apollo was born, bright and fierce, his cry echoing like music across the sea. The island shone with light so pure that the gods themselves turned their eyes to watch. The heavens opened, and a beam of gold touched Delos, anchoring it forever to the earth. Leto's tears of joy fell into the water, and where they touched, lilies bloomed. The twins had come into the world, one bathed in silver, the other in gold. Forever opposite yet forever bound, Apollo, the light that sings, as he grew, Apollo became the embodiment of order and clarity. His hair was the color of morning, and his eyes held the fire of the sun. He carried the bow and the lyre, the tools of death and music, of silence and song. From his father, Zeus, he received the chariot of light, a flaming vessel drawn by white horses that would pull the sun across the sky each day. When Apollo drove it, the dawn followed his laughter, and the world awoke in gold. He was the god of prophecy, of art, of healing, of truth. At Delphi, upon the slopes of Mount Parnassus, he built his sacred temple. There, the priestess Pythia sat upon a tripod, her mind filled with his voice, speaking the words of the future to those who dared to ask. Kings and poets alike came to Delphi, bearing gifts and prayers, hoping to hear even a fragment of Apollo's wisdom. But his words were never simple, for truth, like sunlight, blinds as much as it reveals. In his music, there was both joy and sorrow, the reminder that beauty and pain are born from the same divine fire. He was also the bringer of plague, for the arrows of the sun could burn as easily as they could heal. Wherever he walked, flowers grew in his footsteps, but shadows followed too. Artemis, the silver silence. While her brother blazed in gold, Artemis walked in silver. She became the goddess of the moon, of the hunt, of wild places untouched by men. She roamed forests cloaked in mist, accompanied by nymphs and deer, a bow of moonlight always at her side. Where Apollo governed reason and civilization, Artemis ruled instinct and wilderness. She was fierce and free, protector of women, guardian of childbirth and of beasts. Mortals who entered her forests spoke her name in whispers, for though she was kind to the pure, she was merciless to the arrogant. Those who hunted without respect, who shed blood without need, soon found themselves hunted in return. Yet to those who honored her, she was a gentle presence. The gleam of eyes in the dark woods, the cool hand upon a fevered brow. She never married, never bowed to love or power, for she belonged only to herself and the moon that watched her. Her beauty was cold and distant, but it was the beauty of truth, untamed, eternal. The balance of twins together. Apollo and Artemis brought balance to the world. He was day, she was night. He ruled the mind, she ruled the heart. He taught men to reason, she taught them to listen. When Apollo's chariot set each evening, Artemis rose from the sea, her silver light flowing softly over the sleeping world. She watched over dreams as he watched over deeds. The two never warred, for they understood what few gods did, that opposites are not enemies, but halves of a single truth. The trials of the twins. The lives of the twins were not without sorrow. Once, a mortal woman named Niobe mocked their mother Leto, boasting that she had borne more children and was therefore greater. In her pride, she forgot respect. The twins descended from the sky, their eyes burning with divine wrath. Apollo's arrows struck down Niobe's sons. Artemis's arrows felled her daughters, until only one or two remained. Niobe fled to the mountains, where her grief turned her to stone. Even now, they say, tears flow from her petrified eyes. The twins also punished the giant Theseus, who once dared to attack their mother. He was bound in Tartarus, his body stretched across 9 acres of shadow, while vultures fed upon his heart. But for all their fury, the twins also brought mercy. When the young healer Asclepius, Apollo's son, was slain by Zeus's thunderbolt for defying death, Apollo mourned deeply and his tears fell like sunlight through rain. From his sorrow came the art of medicine, and from his forgiveness the understanding that even gods must bow to fate. Light and shadow eternal. The centuries passed, and mortals came to know the twins in every sunrise and moonrise. They prayed to Apollo for clarity, to Artemis for safety and calm. Their temples rose side by side, one golden, one silver, each a reflection of the other. Sometimes, when the sun sets and the moon rises together, their lights overlap for a breath of time, and the world glows with a strange, perfect balance. That moment, it is said, is when Apollo and Artemis meet again, and the heavens remember their harmony. In their story lies the lesson of all opposites, that neither day nor night, reason nor instinct, love nor solitude, can exist without the other. And so, while Zeus thundered, Poseidon raged, and Hades waited, the twins of light and shadow kept the rhythm of the world. They gave humanity not only warmth and beauty, but the understanding that every heart holds both dawn and dusk within it. The world breathed with them, in, out, day, night, and beneath the quiet pulse of their eternal dance, the story of the gods continued to unfold. When the sun had long since taken its place in the heavens, and the moon her seat upon the darkened sky, a new light began to stir in the hearts of men, not of fire, not of reason, but of something deeper and wilder, a light that danced rather than burned, laughed rather than thundered, and whispered truths too strange for the sober mind. That light was Dionysus, the god of wine, of revelry, of theater and madness, the breaker of boundaries between gods and men. He was not born like the others. His coming into the world was tangled with fire, grief and rebirth. He was, as the poets called him, the twice-born. The twice-born god, his mother was Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes, gentle, beautiful, curious. She had caught the eye of Zeus, who descended to her in secret, his voice soft as rain, his eyes filled with stormlight. For a time they loved, and from that love came the seed of Dionysus. But Hera, ever watchful, heard whispers of her husband's visits. She disguised herself as an old woman and came to Semele's door. "My dear," she said kindly, "if a god truly loves you, should he not reveal himself in all his glory?" Semele, young and unwise, believed her. That night, when Zeus came again, she begged him to show himself as he truly was. Zeus hesitated, for he knew no mortal could survive such radiance. But he had sworn by the river Styx, an oath even he could not break. He revealed himself. Lightning filled the chamber, the air burned, and Semele was consumed in the brilliance of divinity. Yet within the flames, her unborn child still lived. Zeus, stricken with grief, snatched the infant from the fire and sewed him into his own thigh, a womb of thunder and godhood. There the child grew until the time was right. When he was born anew, the world shuddered. The winds grew warm with strange perfume, and ivy sprang from barren soil. Zeus named him Dionysus, the god of joy and transformation, hidden among mortals. But Hera's wrath was not yet sated. She sent her serpents to destroy the child. To save him, Zeus carried Dionysus far from Olympus and left him in the care of Ino, Semele's sister, and her husband, King Athamas. They raised him as a girl, hiding his true nature beneath robes of linen and veil. But Hera, knowing no peace, drove Athamas and Ino mad. Their home became a place of screams and tragedy, and once again, the child god was cast adrift upon the sea. The ocean nymphs, the Naiads, found him floating on the waves and carried him to the faraway valleys of Mount Nysa, a place hidden from the eyes of gods. There, among the vines and wild forests, Dionysus grew in freedom. He learned the language of beasts, the secrets of growth, and the magic of the grapevine, how sunlight becomes sweetness, how sweetness becomes fire, and how that fire frees the soul. He was raised among ivy and laughter. His teachers, not scholars, but the wild itself, Pan, the goat-footed god of nature, taught him to dance and to play the pipes, while the dryads whispered of balance and chaos, of life that blooms and dies and blooms again. And when Dionysus laughed, the forest itself seemed to move with him, leaves trembling, rivers singing, as if the earth were drunk on joy, the gift of wine. As he grew to manhood, Dionysus felt a restlessness that echoed the pulse of the world. He wandered across mountains and through distant lands, teaching men the art of tending vines, the craft of pressing grapes into wine. To some, it was a gift divine, a drink that warmed the heart and bound people together in celebration. To others, it was a curse, for wine reveals truth and madness alike. He carried a thyrsus, a staff tipped with pine cone and wrapped in ivy, symbol of life and ecstasy. Wherever he went, followers gathered, men and women both, but most of all women, whom he freed from the chains of their quiet lives. They were called Maenads, the raving ones, daughters of ecstasy. They danced through forests at night, their feet bare, their hair crowned with ivy, their cries echoing through the hills. To mortal eyes they seemed possessed, but in truth, they were closer to the divine than many priests or kings. For Dionysus offered them something the other gods did not. Not order, not judgment, but release. He taught that the soul is not only reason, but also chaos, that joy and madness are two sides of the same flame. The king, who denied him, but not all men welcomed his gift. In the land of Thebes, his own mother's city, ruled a young king named Pentheus, proud and skeptical. When Dionysus returned, clad in flowing robes and crowned with ivy, Pentheus mocked him. "You bring drunkenness," the king said. "You turn women into beasts. You are no god, but a deceiver." Dionysus smiled gently. "I bring only truth. Pentheus, the wine merely reveals what already lies in the heart." Yet the king refused to listen. He ordered Dionysus imprisoned, But the chains melted like wax in the god's hands, and the prison walls bloomed with ivy. Still, Dionysus did not strike him down. Instead, he invited him, with a voice soft as dream, to come and see his followers in their revels. Pentheus, curious and proud, agreed, disguising himself as a woman to spy upon the Maenads in their frenzy. But when he entered the forest, something strange happened. The wind grew heavy with perfume. The air shimmered like heat on summer stone. And Pentheus forgot his disguise. The Maenads, seeing him, cried out that a wild beast had come among them. In their divine frenzy, they tore him apart, not in malice but in madness, believing they were defending their god. When morning came and the trance had faded, they saw what they had done and wept. Dionysus stood among them, silent. He had not commanded their act, yet it was his power that had unleashed it. He turned away, for even gods bear sorrow. The god who was both joy and terror. Dionysus wandered far after that, his path winding through deserts and mountains, across islands where mortals sang his name. Everywhere he went, he brought both blessing and fear. Sailors who saw him walking upon the waves and mocked him as a madman found their ship transformed into vines, its mast bursting with ivy, its oarsmen turning into dolphins as they leapt laughing into the sea. In another age, he descended into the underworld itself to bring back his mother, Semele. No mortal had ever returned from death, but Dionysus, born of both fire and grief, walked among the dead as if among old friends. He found her pale and quiet by the banks of the Styx. He took her hand, and his warmth spread through the cold air. The shades bowed as he passed, and even Hades, solemn ruler of that dark realm, stepped aside. When they returned to the light, Zeus welcomed her among the immortals. Her name became Thyone, and she sat beside her son among the stars. Thus, Dionysus became not only the god of wine and joy, but of resurrection and redemption, the god who bridged life and death. The eternal festival. As centuries passed, his worship spread across Greece and beyond. His followers built theaters in his honor, for drama and song were his gifts to mankind. In every tragedy and every comedy, his spirit lived, the laughter and the tears, the madness and the beauty, woven together like vine and branch. Each spring, festivals were held in his name. People poured wine upon the earth, thanking him for renewal. They danced in streets and fields, their songs carrying far into the night. The poets said that when Dionysus's laughter was heard, the flowers bloomed earlier and the rivers ran clearer. He was life itself, untamed, honest, ever-changing. And yet, his face was twofold, one side smiling, the other shadowed by sorrow, for he knew that ecstasy without wisdom can become ruin, and freedom without respect can become madness. He was the reminder that joy and pain drink from the same cup, that to be truly alive is to feel everything, to weep, to laugh, to love, to lose, and to find in that chaos the rhythm of eternity. So when the night grows deep, and the music fades, and the last cup of wine is poured, listen closely. Somewhere, between the wind and the heartbeat of the earth, you may hear his whisper, "Dance while you can." The stars, too, will one day fade, but joy is immortal. And thus the name of Dionysus was written not in stone or thunder, but in the pulse of every living thing. His temples were not just of marble, but of laughter, music, and dream, for he was not merely a god of wine, he was the spirit of life itself. The age of gods was slowly changing. The heavens still ruled, but now their gaze began to drift toward the earth, toward mortals who bore traces of their power, men and women born half in starlight and half in dust. They were called heroes, and their stories became the bridge between heaven and mankind. They fought monsters, challenged fate, and carried the flame of divinity into the fragile world of men. Among the first and greatest of them was Perseus, the son of Zeus and the mortal woman Danae, a child born of light, of prophecy, and of courage destined to face terror itself. The prophecy of Acrisius. Long before Perseus drew breath, a prophecy was spoken to Acrisius, king of Argos, that he would one day be killed by his daughter's son. The words haunted him like thunder in the distance. Fearing his fate, Acrisius locked his daughter Danae in a bronze chamber deep beneath his palace, a room sealed against time, where sunlight could only reach through narrow slits of metal. He thought to outwit destiny by burying it alive. But fate, like water, finds every crack. One night, a golden light descended into her chamber, not fire, not wind, but a rain of pure brilliance. It shimmered through the air, warm and silent, and from that light came Zeus himself. He spoke not in thunder but in whisper, and from their union came a child, a boy destined to change the world. When Acrisius discovered the infant, his fear turned to rage. He could not kill his own blood, for that too would invite the gods' wrath. So he sealed Danae and her baby in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea. The waves carried them gently for many days, until the chest came to rest upon the shores of Seriphos, a small island surrounded by quiet waters and tall cliffs. There, a humble fisherman named Dictys found the chest while casting his net at dawn. He opened it and saw the mother and child sleeping within, and his heart filled with mercy. He took them into his home, and so Perseus grew up by the sea, strong, kind, and unbroken by the cruelty of fate. The king and the challenge years passed. Danae's beauty did not fade, and soon the island's ruler, King Polydectes, set his covetous eyes upon her. But Perseus, now grown into a proud young man, stood between them. The king, angered by his defiance, devised a cruel trick. He announced that he would wed another woman, and demanded that every man on the island bring him a gift, a horse fit for a king. Perseus had no horse, no riches, nothing to offer but his courage. So the king smiled slyly and said, "Then bring me the head of the Gorgon Medusa, and I will count it a greater gift than any." The court fell silent. Even the name of Medusa chilled the air. She was one of 3 Gorgon sisters, creatures of night with wings of bronze, fangs of serpents and eyes that turned all who met them to stone. No man had ever faced her and lived, but Perseus, bound by honor, bowed and said, "I will bring you her head." The hall erupted in laughter, yet behind the laughter, the gods were watching. The gifts of the gods. As Perseus left the island, a gentle breeze stirred the waves, and a voice like sunlight broke through the clouds. It was Athena, goddess of wisdom. "You have chosen a path of danger," she said, "but courage is the first tool of victory. Take this, a shield polished so bright that nothing may strike unseen within it." The shield gleamed like still water, a mirror for the soul as much as for the eye. Then came Hermes, the swift messenger, smiling as always. He handed Perseus a curved blade, sharp as moonlight, and sandals with golden wings. "With these," Hermes said, "you will walk upon the wind and strike swifter than the serpent's hiss." But even with divine gifts, Perseus could not find the Gorgon's lair alone. So the gods sent him to the Grey Sisters, 3 old women who shared a single eye between them. He found them huddled beside a cave, their hands trembling as they passed the eye from one to the next. As they argued, Perseus slipped forward, snatched the eye from their grasp, and said softly, "Tell me where the Gorgons sleep, and I will return it." Blind and frightened, they told him of a land beyond the western sea, where night never ends and the Gorgons dream among the stone remains of men. True to his word, Perseus returned their eye, then turned his face toward the edge of the world. The slaying of Medusa, he flew for days over oceans and deserts, until the sky grew dark and silent. No birds called there, no waves broke against the shore. Only statues stood, men and beasts frozen in terror, their faces still twisted in the final moment of sight. Perseus felt the air grow cold. The Gorgons slept upon a bed of shattered stone. Two of them breathed like mountains in slumber, but the third, Medusa, was still as death, her hair alive with serpents whispering and hissing softly. Perseus dared not look directly upon her. He turned Athena's shield toward her face and moved only by her reflection. Step by step, he approached, his sandals silent upon the dust. The serpents stirred. One hissed, and her eyes flickered open. In that heartbeat, Perseus struck. His blade flashed once, and the world seemed to shatter with her scream. Her blood spilled upon the stones, and from it sprang two beings, a winged horse named Pegasus, and a golden giant called Chrysaor. The heavens trembled as they took flight, and Perseus, clutching the Gorgon's head, leapt into the sky. The other sisters awoke, their shrieks shaking the air, their wings beating the wind into fury. They chased him through the night, but his sandals carried him faster than their rage, and the darkness could not hold him. The return and the monster of the sea. As Perseus flew homeward, he came upon a land where the sea had turned violent. The coast was flooded, and upon a cliff stood a woman, chained and weeping. Her name was Andromeda, princess of Ethiopia, offered as sacrifice to a sea monster to atone for her mother's pride. Below her, the waves churned as a creature rose, vast and terrible, its scales glistening in the moonlight, its jaws like black caverns. Perseus hovered above, his heart torn between horror and awe. He drew the head of Medusa from his satchel, its snake still hissing, its face frozen in eternal fury. When the monster saw it, its roar turned to silence, its eyes glazed over, and it became stone, its massive body sinking slowly beneath the waves. Perseus descended, broke the chains that bound Andromeda, and lifted her gently from the rock. Her eyes met his, and the sea wind fell still. He brought her home to her people, and they rejoiced, crowned him hero, and gave him her hand in marriage. The fulfillment of fate. In time, Perseus returned to Seriphos, bearing the Gorgon's head. He found that King Polydectes had grown cruel, tormenting his mother and Dictys, the man who had saved him as a child. Without a word, Perseus entered the hall, drew the head from its cloth, and held it high. At once, the king and his court turned to stone, their laughter and mockery frozen forever in silence. When his vengeance was done, Perseus offered the Gorgon's head to Athena, and she set it upon her shield, where it would forever ward off evil. He lived long after that, a mortal blessed and burdened by the gods. He built cities, raised sons, and filled the world with stories. But destiny never forgets. Years later, at a festival in Thessaly, an old man came to watch the games. Perseus, competing in the discus throw, cast his disc into the wind, and it struck the old man dead. It was Chrysaor, the grandfather who had cast him into the sea as a child. The prophecy had come full circle. Fate, patient and unbroken, had spoken its final word. The legacy of Perseus. When Perseus died, Athena placed his image among the stars, his sword still gleaming in the night sky beside the winged horse Pegasus. His name became the measure of a hero, one who stands between terror and innocence, who faces the darkness not to conquer it, but to bring light to others. And though the world would birth many heroes after him, Heracles, Theseus, Jason, Perseus was the first to prove that mortal courage could walk beside the power of gods. For in every age, there is a darkness to be faced, a monster that waits, and a choice to be made, to look away in fear or to lift the shield and face it, steady and unblinking. And as long as men remember that choice, the story of Perseus will never end. The age of gods was dimming, their thrones still shone upon Olympus, but the world below had begun to stir with the footsteps of men. The fire that Prometheus had given long ago had spread across every land, and with it came courage and pride. No longer did mortals merely bow before the will of heaven. Some dared to act, to fight, to suffer, and to rise beyond what even the gods expected of them. These were the heroes of the second dawn, the children of men who carried divine fire in their hearts, and whose struggles would echo louder than prayers. Heracles, the strength of suffering. Of all those born between God and mortal, none shone brighter or fell harder than Heracles, son of Zeus and Alcmene, a woman of mortal grace and quiet courage. He came into the world under Hera's furious gaze. For though Zeus's loves had filled the earth with his children, this one, Hera sensed, was destined to eclipse them all. Before the boy could even walk, she sent 2 serpents to his cradle. But the child reached out, grasped them in his tiny hands, and strangled them as if they were nothing but threads of silk. As he grew, his strength became legend. He lifted chariots, tamed beasts, and trained in every art of war. Yet despite his power, his heart was kind, too kind perhaps, for the cruelty of fate. For Hera's vengeance was not finished. She clouded his mind with madness, and in that darkness, Heracles did what he could never forgive himself for. He struck down his own wife and children. When he awoke and saw what he had done, his cries shook the mountains. He begged the gods for punishment, for a way to cleanse his soul, and so, the oracle of Delphi, the voice of Apollo, commanded him to serve King Eurystheus and perform 12 labors, deeds so impossible that even the gods would tremble to face them. Heracles bowed his head, and his long atonement began. He fought the Nemean lion, its skin unpierceable by blade, and strangled it with his bare hands. He slew the Lernaean hydra, its many heads hissing and reborn, until he burned their necks with fire so they could grow no more. He captured the Erymanthian boar, cleansed the Augean stables in a single day by turning 2 rivers through them, and brought back the Ceryneian hind, sacred to Artemis, without shedding a drop of blood. He hunted the Stymphalian birds, terrifying creatures with bronze feathers, and brought the Cretan bull to its knees. He tamed Diomedes' man-eating horses, stole the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, and brought back the cattle of Geryon from the edge of the world. Finally, he descended into Hades itself to capture Cerberus, the 3-headed guardian of the dead. He returned, pale and silent, leading the beast by chains of shadow. Even the gods looked away, for no mortal had ever walked among the dead and returned whole. When his penance was done, Heracles found no peace. He had conquered monsters, but he could not conquer sorrow. He wandered the earth in silence, his hands forever stained by both greatness and guilt. And when his mortal body could bear no more, he built a pyre upon Mount Oeta, laid himself upon it, and waited for the fire to come. Zeus looked down and wept. When the flames consumed his son's body, the sky opened, and Heracles rose to Olympus, transformed into an immortal. He was granted peace at last, and even Hera, long his enemy, forgave him and offered her hand. The world below mourned him, but his name lived forever, not for his victories, but for his endurance. For Heracles was not the god of strength. He was the god of pain survived. Theseus, the mind of a hero, in the east, Another kind of hero walked the earth. Where Heracles was strength, Theseus was cunning. He was the son of Aegeus, king of Athens, though his birth was shrouded in mystery and prophecy. When he came of age, he lifted a great stone beneath which his father had hidden a sword and sandals, and set out to claim his destiny. The road to Athens was long and perilous, filled with robbers and beasts. Each one Theseus faced not with brute force, but with wit and patience. He turned their own traps against them, proving that the greatest weapon is a mind unafraid to think. But his true trial awaited him in Crete, in the dark labyrinth built by Daedalus, home to the Minotaur, a creature born of sin and divine punishment, half man, half bull. Each year, Athens was forced to send 7 youths and 7 maidens to be devoured by the beast. Theseus volunteered himself among them. When he arrived, he met Ariadne, daughter of King Minos, who saw in him both courage and gentleness. She gave him a thread of gold, telling him to tie it at the labyrinth's entrance, so that he might find his way out again. In the heart of the maze, Theseus met the Minotaur. The beast roared, a sound of fury and loneliness, for it had never known mercy. The battle was fierce, but Theseus struck true, slaying it with the sword he carried from his father's stone. He followed the thread back to the light, and for a moment the labyrinth fell silent forever. He fled Crete with Ariadne, but when they stopped upon the island of Naxos, the gods intervened. Dionysus came to him in a dream, claiming Ariadne as his bride, and Theseus awoke to find her gone, her golden thread now woven into the stars. When he returned to Athens, he found his father waiting upon the cliffs. Seeing black sails in the distance, for Theseus had forgotten to change them to white, Aegeus believed his son dead, and cast himself into the sea. From that day, the waters bore his name, the Aegean Sea. Theseus became king, a ruler who sought to bring reason and unity to his people. He was not perfect, but he was human, and that perhaps was the most divine thing of all. The twilight of heroes. As years passed, the gods grew quieter, their hands withdrawing slowly from the affairs of men. But their children, the heroes, had reshaped the earth. They had slain monsters, faced kings, defied fate and suffered for glory, and through them, the world learned something the gods had forgotten, that greatness does not come from immortality, but from the courage to live and lose and still rise again. When night falls upon the old lands, and the stars shimmer above the ruins of forgotten temples, their names still drift upon the wind: Heracles, Theseus, Perseus. Men, but more than men, sons of both sky and soil. Proof that even in the shadow of gods, human hands can shape destiny. Time, like the tide, never stops its turning. The gods had begun to fade from the earth, but before they vanished into legend, they would leave behind one last story, a story of beauty and pride, of prophecy, vengeance, and fire, a story that would echo through every age to come. It began not with war, but with a wedding, the apple of discord. When the sea nymph Thetis was to wed the mortal hero Peleus, all the gods of Olympus were invited to the feast, all but one. Eris, goddess of strife, was left uninvited, for who would welcome discord to a celebration? But Eris came anyway. She entered the golden hall in silence, her smile thin as a blade. From her hand she rolled a golden apple across the table. Upon it were inscribed 3 simple words: "For the fairest." At once, the laughter stopped. 3 goddesses reached for it: Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom; and Aphrodite, goddess of love. Each claimed it. Each refused to yield, and so Zeus, unwilling to choose among them, commanded that the decision be made by a mortal man, a shepherd prince named Paris. who tended his flocks upon the slopes of Mount Ida near Troy. Hermes descended, bearing the apple and the three radiant goddesses. They stood before the young man, each offering him a gift in exchange for his judgment. Hera promised power to rule all the lands of men. Athena promised victory, wisdom in war, and glory everlasting. But Aphrodite smiled and whispered, "I will give you the most beautiful woman in the world." Paris, struck by her charm and blinded by desire, placed the apple in her hand. From that moment, his fate and the fate of the world was sealed. For the most beautiful woman in the world was Helen, Queen of Sparta, wife to King Menelaus. The abduction. Aphrodite fulfilled her promise. When Paris journeyed to Sparta as a guest, Helen saw him and felt her heart tremble, for the goddess had already touched it. Love bloomed like fire, swift and merciless. When night fell, Paris and Helen fled across the sea to Troy. The winds carried word of their flight, and Menelaus, humiliated and enraged, called upon his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, to raise an army. And so the mightiest host ever seen gathered at the shores of Aulis, 1,000 ships filled with heroes and kings, each bound by oath to bring Helen home. There was Odysseus, clever and cunning, Ajax, strong as a mountain, Nestor, wise and old, and Achilles, son of Theseus, the greatest warrior to ever live, his body invulnerable but for a single place upon his heel. The gods watched from their thrones, half in pity, half in amusement, for they knew that what was to come would be both glorious and terrible. The war at Troy. For 10 long years, the Greeks besieged the walls of Troy, and the city stood proud beneath its high towers. Each dawn brought battle, and each night the cries of the dying echoed across the plains. At first, the war seemed endless, but neither side willing to yield. But then came Achilles, shining in his armor like living fire. Wherever he walked, victory followed. No blade could pierce him. No warrior could match him. Even the rivers of Troy ran red before his rage, yet pride is the shadow of greatness. When Agamemnon insulted him, claiming a prize that Achilles had won in battle, the warrior withdrew his sword and refused to fight. Without him, the Greeks began to falter, and the Trojans, led by noble Hector, pressed them hard against the sea. The gods, divided, took sides, Hera and Athena with the Greeks, Aphrodite and Apollo with Troy. The heavens themselves became a battlefield. Lightning split the clouds, and the stars trembled at the sound of their wrath. But even gods grow weary of war. The death of heroes, in time, grief moved Achilles' heart. His beloved companion Patroclus had taken up his armor and gone into battle, only to fall beneath Hector's spear. When the news reached him, Achilles' cries shook the camp like thunder. He returned to battle not for glory, but for vengeance. The gods themselves stepped aside as he charged across the plain, and when he met Hector beneath the walls, the earth held its breath. Their fight was fierce, but fate had already chosen its victor. Achilles struck, and Hector fell. He tied the body of Troy's greatest son to his chariot and dragged it through the dust, blinded by grief and fury. But when the old king Priam, Hector's father, came to him in the night, kneeling before his son's killer, Achilles' heart broke open. He lifted the old man's hands, returned the body, and wept beside him. For even in the heart of rage, mercy still flickered like a dying flame. But Achilles' own death soon followed. Paris, guided by Apollo, loosed an arrow that struck him in the heel, the one place where his mother's divine protection did not reach. As he fell, the world seemed to dim, and the sea winds carried his name away like a sigh. The fall of Troy without Achilles, the Greeks turned to cunning. Odysseus conceived a plan born not of might, but of deceit. They built a great wooden horse and left it at the gates of Troy, then sailed away, pretending to abandon the war. The Trojans, thinking the horse a gift of surrender, dragged it into their city. They celebrated through the night, their laughter echoing under the stars. But when the moon reached its highest, a trap door opened, and Greek warriors slipped out from within. They opened the gates to the returning fleet, and before dawn, Troy burned. The towers that had stood for generations collapsed in flame and smoke. Men fought in the streets. Women cried out to gods who no longer answered. King Priam was slain, and the temples fell to ash. Only a few escaped, among them Aeneas, who carried his father upon his back and fled across the sea, guided by destiny to the lands that would one day become Rome. The silence after. When the smoke cleared, the age of heroes began to fade. The gods turned their faces from the earth, and the sea carried away the remnants of war. Helen returned to Sparta, her beauty untouched by time, but her heart heavy with ghosts. Menelaus forgave her, for love, even wounded, endures. The surviving warriors sailed home, each to his own fate. For them no glory awaited, only long years of wandering, and the whisper that even the greatest cannot escape the cost of their deeds. And thus the war that had begun with an apple ended with ashes. The gods were silent. The white heroes were gone, and the world, once full of divine fire, grew quiet beneath the slow turning of the stars. The fires of Troy had long gone out. The sea had swallowed the ashes, and the wind carried away the cries of victory and loss alike. But one ship still drifted upon the endless waves, its sail torn, its oars cracked, its captain awake beneath a lonely sky. His name was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the man of many minds, the one whom even gods called cunning. He had fought bravely in the war, but his true story began after it ended. For his greatest battle was not against swords or spears, but against time, distance, and fate itself. The journey begins. When Troy burned, Odysseus longed only to return to his home, to his wife Penelope and to his son Telemachus, who had grown from a child to a man in his absence. But the sea does not easily forgive. Poseidon, god of the waves, still burned with anger, for Odysseus had once blinded his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, in order to escape his cave. And so the sea became his enemy, rising against him with storm after storm. For 10 long years, Odysseus wandered across the face of the world. Each island he reached was both a gift and a trial, the lands of wonder. He met the lotus eaters, whose flowers made men forget their homes and dreams, and he tore his crew away before they too were lost to forgetting. He faced the sorceress Circe, who turned his men into beasts, but he tamed her with courage and reason, and she became his ally, teaching him the ways of the gods and the dead. He sailed to the edge of the world, to the land of Hades, where he spoke with the shades of heroes long gone. There he met the ghost of Achilles, who said softly, "I would rather be a slave among the living than a king among the dead." Odysseus bowed his head, for in that single truth lay the sorrow of all mortal glory. He passed between Scylla and Charybdis, one a monster of many heads, the other a whirlpool that devoured ships whole. He chose to face Scylla, losing 6 of his men but saving the rest, for wisdom, he learned, is not the absence of pain, but the choosing of which pain to bear. And when at last the sea grew calm, he reached the island of the sun god Helios, whose cattle were sacred. Though Odysseus warned his crew not to touch them, hunger drove them to disobey. When they sailed again, Zeus struck their ship with lightning, and only Odysseus survived, the island of Calypso. He drifted for days upon broken wood, until he came to the island of Ogygia, where the nymph Calypso dwelled. She found him upon the shore, half dead, and nursed him back to life. She fell in love with him, and for 7 long years kept him by her side. She offered him everything: immortality, pleasure, freedom from pain. But his heart remained bound to Ithaca, to the small island where his wife still waited. At last, even the gods pitied him. Hermes descended upon golden wings and told Calypso that Zeus had commanded his release. She wept but obeyed. She gave him a raft, food, and a final kiss. And once more, Odysseus set his face toward home, returned to Ithaca. When he at last reached his homeland, the years had changed it. His palace was overrun by suitors, men who believed him dead and sought to marry Penelope for her wealth and crown. She, faithful and wise, had kept them at bay with cleverness, weaving a funeral shroud by day and unraveling it by night, promising to choose a husband when it was finished. Odysseus came in disguise, his hair grey, his face lined by sea and sorrow. No one recognized him, not even his wife. But his old dog, Argos, saw him once more, wagged his tail, and died content. That night, Odysseus strung his bow, the same bow no other man could draw, and revealed himself at last. The hall erupted into chaos, arrows flew, and the suitors fell one by one. When the silence returned, Penelope approached him slowly, doubt still shadowing her eyes. He spoke to her not of war, nor of gods, but of their secret, the bed he had built long ago, its roots carved from a living olive tree, and at that, she knew him. They embraced beneath the soft lamplight, and for the first time in 20 years, the wanderer was home. The fading of the gods. But though his journey ended, the age that had carried him was dying. The gods, once loud and near, had grown quiet. Their temples still stood, but their voices no longer thundered. They watched, unseen, as men began to build their own strength, their own laws, their own wisdom. Zeus still ruled the heavens, but his storms came less often. Poseidon's waves were calm. Apollo's temples filled not with oracles, but with scholars and poets, and Dionysus's festivals turned from worship to celebration of art and life itself. The gods were not gone, only sleeping, their names whispered now in story, not in prayer. And perhaps in that silence, they smiled, for their purpose had been fulfilled. They had made a world that could live without them. Odysseus, older now, walked along the shore one last time. The sea, his old enemy and friend, breathed quietly against the rocks. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he thought he could hear the laughter of sailors long gone, the song of the sirens fading on the wind. He smiled, and the tide washed gently around his feet, a final farewell from the restless sea. And so, the last of the great heroes faded into peace, and the dawn that followed was quiet and mortal and new. The sea is quiet now. The wind no longer carries the voices of heroes, and the mountains, once alive with the laughter of gods, stand still beneath the stars. Time has passed over Olympus like soft rain, and where thunder once ruled, only echoes remain. The golden age of gods and heroes had ended, but its stories, its light, its pain, its wonder, still lingered like the glow after sunset. The fading of Olympus, high above the mortal world. The halls of Olympus still shimmered, but their light grew thin, like morning mist dissolving before the day. Zeus sat upon his throne, his thunder silent. His gaze turned downward to the earth below. He saw cities rising where forests had stood, temples filled with songs not for him, but for the new gods of man, reason, art, knowledge, and hope. Hera walked beside him, no longer burning with jealousy, but quiet, dignified, watching the world unfold without divine hands to guide it. Poseidon's waves still danced, But his storms grew soft and gentle, their fury long forgotten. In the depths he dreamed of his coral palace, and the laughter of dolphins was his hymn. Hades remained in his shadowed realm, but even death had changed. Mortals no longer feared him as they once had. They spoke of peace beyond the veil, not punishment, and that, perhaps, was the greatest gift he ever gave them. Apollo's temples turned to dust, but his light became the sun itself, his wisdom the voice of philosophy, his music the heartbeat of all art. Artemis still wandered the forests, but her arrows slept. The wolves howled for her, and in every moonrise, her reflection touched the rivers like memory. Dionysus no longer walked the earth in frenzy. His spirit lived in laughter, in poetry, in every toast raised beneath the stars. And Athena, wise, calm, eternal, stood upon the ruins of her city, watching scholars study where once priests prayed. Her eyes held no sadness, only pride, for wisdom had become humanity's own inheritance. The gods did not die. They simply stepped back, like teachers watching their children grow. Their voices turned into whispers, their names into stories, their stories into dreams. And dreams, unlike empires, never fade. The memory of heroes across the lands where they once walked. The heroes became constellations, their names carved into the stars. Perseus shone still beside Pegasus, his sword forever raised. Heracles burned like a red ember in the night sky, a reminder that even the strongest hearts can suffer and still endure. Theseus rested by the sea, his shadow forever watching over the Aegean waves. And Odysseus, though his ship long vanished, still drifted in the minds of men, a symbol of the wanderer within every soul. People told their stories around fires, their children listening wide-eyed, their hearts filled with the ache of something they could not name, the longing for a world where gods still touched the earth. But in truth, the gods never left. They became the wind that bends the trees, the spark in a poet's heart, the courage in a soldier's chest, the whisper that says, "Try once more." Every time a mortal chooses honor over fear, love over pride, truth over silence, the gods remember, and the old songs stir again. When myths become memories, time moved on. The marble temples fell to ruin. The great cities turned to dust. Yet beneath it all, the stories remained. They became ink upon parchment, then words upon tongues, then dreams within sleep. And though the names changed, Zeus became Jupiter, Poseidon became Neptune, and heroes became legends, their spirit remained the same. For every age has its gods, and every soul its Olympus. The lightning, the sea, the underworld, the sun, they are not gone. They live within us, reborn with every heartbeat. When we love fiercely, we are Aphrodite's flame. When we think deeply, we are touched by Athena's wisdom. When we suffer yet endure, we walk in Heracles' shadow. When we dare to dream, we are children of Prometheus. And when we look at the night sky and feel the pull of something greater than ourselves, it is the memory of Olympus calling, soft, ancient, and endless. The last light on the highest peak of the mountain, where no mortal eye could see, the gods gathered one final time. The air shimmered with 1,000 sunsets. Zeus stood and raised his hand, not in command, Idu, but in farewell. "We have done what we were meant to do," he said. "The world no longer needs thunder to awaken. It has found its own fire." The others nodded. They turned toward the horizon, where dawn was breaking upon the mortal world. The light grew brighter, and slowly, one by one, they stepped into it, their forms dissolving into mist, their laughter fading into wind. Only Athena lingered for a moment, looking back. Her voice was a whisper carried on the breeze. "Remember us not as gods, but as lessons. For what we were, you have become. And then she too was gone. The mountain grew quiet. The clouds rolled gently across the sky. The world exhaled. Epilogue. The eternal flame. Night fell again, and a single flame burned upon the mountain peak. It was small, just a spark, flickering in the dark, but it never went out. That flame was the memory of all that had been, of the Titans, the Olympians, the heroes, and the hearts of men who dreamed among them. And somewhere, perhaps in the hush before sleep or the moment before dawn, you can still feel it, the pulse of a divine story that never truly ended, the fire of Prometheus, the wisdom of Athena, the courage of Perseus, the endurance of Heracles, the cleverness of Odysseus, the music of Apollo, the grace of Artemis, the laughter of Dionysus, all still alive, all still glowing within us. For though the gods have vanished from the earth, they remain where they have always belonged, in the dreams of humankind. And if you listen closely, in the stillness of night, beneath the quiet turning of the stars, you might just hear them, the whisper of Olympus, soft and eternal, saying, "We were never gone. You were simply ready." And so the story ends, not in thunder, but in peace. The age of myth passes, and the age of man begins. But the light of those stories still burns quietly in every heart that dares to dream.